I'm the team principal of DS Automobiles Techeetah, the Formula E team, and I'll be talking a bit about what we do in Formula E, some of the strategy behind why I switched from Formula One, and what we're doing in the racing series. So yes, as Mark said, I'm one of the founding team principals of Formula E. I started quite a few years ago, as Mark said. I came over from Australia, where I used to do V8 supercars and work for General Motors. So I've come from always working in automotive and always interested in cars. So I was worked in Formula One for quite a while. Enjoyable time there. Obviously, more revs, more power is what it's all about in motor racing, especially in Formula One. That's one of our vehicles when we were in Aguri at the time with Honda. It was a great fun year, starting a Formula One team from scratch in 100 days. That was one of the best experiences I've probably ever had in my life. Often, people say, will Formula E become Formula One? Why did you leave Formula One? That's a fairly interesting, I think, part of the story. Even though I think Formula One is there's a lot of going on. The cars are very fast. The engines are quite amazing. In fact, they've got incredibly complicated now in the last few years. I found that I wasn't learning anything anymore. I mean, you always learn. You're always going forward, but I was up for a new challenge. And sadly, in the last crash, we in around about 2008, we had to close down that team because of the financial problems in the world. And I went off looking for what I thought might be the future of motorsport. And this is a little sketch that we kept, actually, that we did back in September 2009. And the reason that I put that particular slide on the screen is just to show that, even though it feels like things move fast sometimes, that's, over 10 years ago when we first started looking at what Formula E would look like, what electric racing cars could look like. This sketch actually we did with David Hunt, which is James Hunt's brother. Sadly, he's passed away since we did this original sketch. And this was where we were sketching around, trying to figure out what would an electric series look like. Weirdly, we did call it Formula E at the time. As you see, I decided to date it just so we'd remember when we actually did it. So at that time, it's sort of interesting when I present to young students or entrepreneurs and other such people. I try to say that a lot of it started with humble beginnings. It started off on sketches on the back of a fag packet as such, throwing down ideas, trying to figure out what something might look like. Some of those elements that are sketched on that sketch are actually not done yet in Formula E, where they're coming in the next few years. So I helped a company spin out of Oxford University called Oxford Yasser Motors, which some people might know because it was based down in Milton Park, not too far away. And that's how I got interested in electric vehicles and started to do the business research on electric cars and what might be the future. So I will digress. It's maybe hopefully not too heavy for an evening's presentation, but I started to look at what would be what is the driving force behind electric vehicle strategy? Why are we thinking about electric vehicles? Why are we going this direction? Since that day, obviously 10, 12 years ago, it wasn't such a big thing in the media, and we've got a few photos later on about some of the elements of it. But one of the fundamental things that is happening in the world is that we are still urbanizing, even though the latest COVID situation may have made more people not want to go to urban centers. It's still predicted that we'll be around 65% in 2040. Most of that is in Asia, and obviously that is an important factor. The world's mega cities are growing at a great rate, many of them in Asia, places like Africa. London can be counted as a mega city if you take into consideration the Greater London area. Some people say it's above 10 million people is roughly the number, although some others say it's different. So places like Tokyo, Shanghai, Mexico City and others are important cities in that respect. And obviously with that comes the problems of clean air and congestion and other elements. However, I mean, I've always worked on the fact that you need to follow the money. And if 60% of the world's GDP is going to be generated from those megacities, from a top 600, then we really have to focus in on what is important in cities, especially megacities, and what do they need in the future. So the final concept, after all of that scheming and strategizing over the years, was actually borne out by Alejandro Agag. He worked with the FIA and came up with a total concept for FORMULAE. It was started in 2014, sorry. So you can already see from the original discussions that people were having, it still took another sort of 4 to 5 years until we actually started racing. And this is a picture of all the team principals that were involved in the beginning. They had quite a smart strategy. They went for brands and brands from racing. So you had everybody from Andretti, you have Alain Prost was there in the middle. You had teams from India. So Mahindra came in quite early, and Renault was one of the founding teams and founding manufacturers. So in those days, I suppose from the 2 slides that I've shown just now, what I tried to explain to people is how crazy people thought we were. And it's very hard now when everybody's seeing that electric vehicles are becoming more and more common. They're still not obviously a large percentage in the world, but they are becoming more and more common and almost established. In those days, we had people saying we were crazy. You know, what are you doing? This is nuts. Especially many of our friends from Formula One. So this is how it started back in 2014. So 6 years later, we're traveling around the world. We go to many places. We were trying to start in. We're trying to start again for next season, although some things are being delayed. This is last year's calendar. I didn't put up the next year's calendar yet because there's a few TBAs and some effects of COVID that might still have an impact. So we typically start in the Middle East. We go to places like Santiago in Chile, Mexico, which is one of the big mega cities. Sometimes we go to Morocco, depending if that works out to be the right thing. So we do travel to Africa. And then some of the quite cool races in places like Rome, Paris, downtown in Paris. We were meant to go to Seoul this year, but we'll be going next year, hopefully. And places as far away as Jakarta and then back to Berlin, New York and London. We didn't get to do London this year, which is a shame because we had to do everything in a bit of a hurry. So actually on that list, we got down to Marrakesh, Morocco, when the COVID situation started to get quite a lot more severe. And we didn't end up doing the other races, and the FORMULAE had to work away and get us a final 6 races in Berlin, which we completed in August, which is where we won the championship. So there's still a lot of questions as to what's going to happen in the future, how we're going to race. But one thing that was very successful this year was we did race in Berlin. If you look at anything on the internet, you'll see we were wearing masks, social distancing. We didn't have any fans, and that's obviously something that everybody's keen to get back happening again. But we were able to complete a season of 11 races, and so at least we got that done this year. Oh, I need to change that. That says season 5. Okay, season 6, we also won the championship. So actually, in season 5, we won both championships, and actually we won both the championships this year as well. It was a pretty interesting set of races. We actually dominated quite a lot in Berlin, much to the surprise of our competitors. We have now in FORMULAE everybody from Porsche, Mercedes, BMW, Nissan and others. So it's quite a hotly contested championship now. In fact, in my career, it's probably one of the more competitive racing series in the world. There's not many places where you can have 8 car companies competing against each other. In fact, it happened for quite a short period of time in Formula One when there was 7 manufacturers, and also in British touring cars there was quite a few at one point. But it's difficult when you're trying to win as a car company. So we are, as we said, with DS Automobiles, which is a spin-off brand of the original DS. If you've seen the old sleek design DS that used to be driven by the president of France, used to ride in, etc. This is the new brand that's come out of the PSA group, and that's who we race with. So we go into the next season as the champions. This season it was Antonio Felix da Costa and John Eric won the last 2 drivers' championships. So we thought we might jump and sort of talk a little bit about what is happening in Formula E, what makes it different, what are we doing. So, I mean, one of the things that if you do watch Formula E compared to Formula One, if you're watching both, one of the big things is that it's only 45 minutes races. So they're shorter races. That is partly because of the electric element of the racing, but also it's part of the recognition that we've all got less time and people want to jump from channel to channel nowadays and don't want to often sit for a whole Sunday afternoon. We often race on a Saturday, so we stay away from what is traditionally Formula One racing on a Sunday. We race in city centres, which means that the tracks are a lot more compact. So we race, for example, in Monaco, we race at a different race track than the Formula One cars. Instead of going up the hill into the casino area, we go back down beside the water, and we have a very short race there. But we try to, that originally was done to not compare lap times as much. So I think it's one of the most competitive lineups in racing. We have some really interesting qualifying formats, which cause lots of difficulty for everybody. The qualifying goes in order of the championship, and going out first is not the best place to be. And it's very hard to explain to people how difficult it is to go out first in this series, but it does make it very competitive. And it's probably one of the reasons that we won the races in Berlin. So we're developing the new tech. I think most of the car companies see that doing development in motor racing allows technology to go from racing to the road. We're looking at new ideas. I think some people, when they first started doing Formula E, didn't expect to have made so many gains over the last 6 years. But they're all very small, but they're incremental, and it's great to see some of that technology going into some of the DS automobile cars. And you can also see with PSA, which is the parent company of DS, many more electric vehicles coming from that. The sustainability angle is very important. Obviously, the race for clean air, I think, is probably the best way to put it. It's very important. We are pioneering, global adoption of clean mobility, as I've written there, encouraging people to drive electric cars. If you're fans of Top Gear, you may remember there was an episode where they built their own electric car. If anyone remembers that, and they drove around the middle of Oxford at about 5 miles an hour with many people trying to overtake them. It was a terrible looking thing. But that's what many people at the time, when we first started, thought about electric cars. They were just milk floats. Now I think there's a fairly high recognition. You see cars like the Porsche Taycan, and obviously the Tesla and others that are coming, like the DSs, that show that electric cars are important. And then the other element is the renewable energy element of it, which I'll come into later on. So in the world of automotive, there's a lot of focus now on connected, and that means cars that have data coming off them. Autonomous, which is something I also do at the same time. I have an autonomous car company in Oxford, which you're welcome to come and try and see it at some point when we're allowed to visit. Shared, so there's more element of shared, although the COVID situation has obviously changed the shared element quite a bit, and electric. And this is what most car companies are currently looking at in terms of the future. The element that we've added is clean, and that is really highlighted by what's going on in the world at the moment. I was asked to do a slide, at some point in the recent past to show what I thought about COVID, and this is the somebody else will probably tell me which one it is, but I think it's the in Mumbai, I think it is, the India Gate, the War Memorial, and that was before and after. And one thing that I found when I was talking early in the FORMULAE's history was that I was talking to Lord Drayson, and he was reminding me, this is a photo from, again, I'll get the date probably wrong, but I think it's 1952 or something like that in London, when I believe the count of pollution was something like 4,000 in the air, and thousands of people died. And what Lord Drayson said at the time, he said, that the problem with CO2 is you can't touch and feel it, but this you can touch and you can feel. And so clean air has probably in some ways overtaken the discussion compared to CO2, even though it's all very interrelated. But clean air has certainly become a focus, and COVID has certainly brought that to the fore and probably made it something that most people can touch and feel. Because if you're in India, or we've all seen photos around the world, if that was before and after, you can really tell the difference once we go back to full transportation. So what's actually happening in terms of technology in FORMULAE? When we started, we actually had to have 2 cars per driver. So if anybody watched FORMULAE in the first 4 seasons, we actually had to change the driver had to change from car to car, which actually did provide a bit of interest. Actually, it did turn out to be an entertaining element of it. We had some things like fan boost. So FORMULAE's always been trying to be different. So fan boost is the fans vote for extra power in the car. That's still around. So that was one of the interesting elements. We had a battery that's about 28 kilowatt hours, only about 200 kilowatts maximum power. And we had to change in the middle of the car, the drivers in the middle of the race. So that was done because at the time, nobody had ever done a race car that was electric at these speeds. Nobody had ever done racing around the world with electric cars. So it was conservative to a degree, but we got there and we went racing, and that was something that not many people thought we would do. We're currently in generation 2 of the car. The battery pack has increased to 54 kilowatt hours, so there's only one car per driver now. The power's increased, the speed's increased, and we've added a number of really interesting elements, such as attack mode, which is the drivers in a Mario Kart type way have to go offline and go through 2 elements on the track, and then they get extra power. It's quite exciting to watch because deliberately, when you go through those markings on the track, you lose time. So to go and get your attack mode, you lose time. Other elements are driver's eye, which is different camera angles. And then the thing for the future is we're looking at fast charging, which is what I've called flash charging, regeneration. So now we only have 2-wheel drive, so the rear wheels, but in the future it'll go to 4-wheel drive, which will allow the cars to regenerate more energy. The car will look different. That hasn't been announced yet. And then there'll be some elements of differentiation for the car companies potentially. And something that we just announced this week for the Climate Change Week was that the series, FORMULAE series, including teams, events, and fans, is that since the beginning, it has now been accredited as a net zero carbon sport, the first one in the world. So there's a lot of elements of sustainability that FORMULAE is working on. Another element that we've sort of come across when we travel around the world is because people ask us, what is going to change electric vehicles and how the uptake of electric vehicles will play out over the future. One thing we've noticed as we go to the places around the world is that many of the cities are actually changing the rules. So many of the car companies had been previously focusing on, you know, EU regulations or American regulations or others around the world, China, for example. But as we see, it's actually accelerating more and more. And I saw in Oxford this week, they've closed one of the more popular streets, George Street, to traffic, so that people could eat out in the streets. So there's a real acceleration of what's going on, we're finding at the moment. So as cities start to change the rules, they start to change the rules of the country because they're doing things differently than what was expected in the country. So there's a lot of pressure on the car companies to change quickly, because as cities start to take the lead separately to maybe countries. So as Paris starts to ban cars on a Sunday, the Paris mayor is doing extra elements like the walkable city, so anybody can be able to get to services within 15 minutes of walking. Places like Bogota are shutting down city centers. When we go to Mexico City, the big, large central street through the center of the city closes on a Sunday for people to ride bicycles and do sports and other activities. So it's really amazing to watch since we started doing FORMULAE, and as we started to do first of those sketches back in 2009, how far it's come, but at the same time, how long it takes to change something. You know, that's the thing that I've found is the most interesting. One of the elements that we always have to answer, this is on the right hand side, there is a little Twitter a tweet, if you can read that. It's that what they call the long tailpipe argument. If you've got an electric vehicle, it is emission-free at point of use. So if you're using an electric vehicle in a city, it does have zero emissions where it's used, and that's why it has obviously an impact on the clean air element. But depending on where you are driving that vehicle in the world, you have to look carefully at how the electricity is coming to the car. So on the left-hand side, maybe this doesn't show up very well on your computer screens, but it's called carbon intensity, which is an element of how much carbon is used to make the per kilowatt hour of energy in your country. So where I'm from, Australia, is like the third from the right-hand side, which is bad because that's it's very much coal-dominated country. But to the very, very left, there's countries like Paraguay and Uruguay, where we did race at one point, which have a lot of solar and hydro. And then interestingly, a country like France has a lot of nuclear. So it's very low carbon in a country like France, which is interesting. You've probably seen, and I'm always interested in a lot of the things you see where the UK announces every so often, we have run this many days without coal since the Industrial Revolution. You know, those kind of comments are really fascinating to me. So it is an important element. And so part of what we need to do around the world as we're traveling is talk about electric vehicles do reduce the emissions at the point of use, which obviously helps the cities and helps the clean air. But we also have to be focusing on the carbon intensity of the grid. And if you are interested in being very geeky, you can download an app which will tell you at any time in the UK what the carbon intensity is of the grid. And you can also get it down to the detail of the different areas of the UK. So Scotland has a lot of wind and other elements. So if you're buying electricity in Scotland, for example, you will have a very low carbon intensity of your car being charged. So that's an element to answer that question. One of the that's the grid carbon app that I was talking about, where you can see the breakdown of the energy in the UK at any one time, and then you can take that number and apply it to your electric car, and that tells you how much grams of CO2 that is one of the calculations that you need to look at. A lot of people ask, when will FORMULAE take over Formula One at one point. It's hard to tell whether that's the case. One of the best ways of thinking about it is, how is the energy carried? So in our cars, we carry the energy with batteries, but a lot of discussion about hydrogen. So that's another way of carrying the energy. And of course, when you're in an internal combustion engine, we're carrying the energy with a fuel. I think the easy answer is that the electrification of the powertrain is inevitable. So we go the route of a diesel electric train, for example, where the powertrain is electric, but maybe the energy is carried in a different way. I'm not sure which one's going to win. There'll be horses for courses, I would say. It seems like batteries will be the right thing for the cities. Hydrogen might be the right solution for long distance journeys. Also, there's a lot of discussion about hydrogen being a way of transporting, let's say, energy from a place like Australia using solar, turn that energy into hydrogen, then transfer it overseas and use it in another country. So there's a lot of discussion there. Why is battery electric winning, let's say, at the moment? It does just flow out of the walls, meaning, you can just plug it into anywhere in the world and you will be able to have electricity. Just a little interesting side note there, that an F1 car, if you're looking at grams per kilometer, an F1 car back in 2007, it's probably half by now, but still the order of magnitude is very high at 1,500 grams per kilometer. Whereas when in certain times, depending on how we charge the cars at the racetrack, they can be lower than 22 grams per CO2. That was when we charged them with something called aquafuel, which is a glycerin-based fuel. And the final little element is that a lot of people say, but if I buy an electric car, how does that have an impact in the future? And I think the best way to look at it is that if you buy an electric car now, depending on how it's manufactured, and most of the manufacturers are looking very carefully at how the total life cycle works. So the best ones are when the batteries are manufactured in a plant that is using renewable energy to manufacture. But the good thing is that governments can impact the grid. So if you have an electric car, it actually gets greener as the grid gets greened. So as we put more solar, as we put more wind, as we put more nuclear, then your car becomes more efficient as time goes on. So that's an element to answer, some of the questions about why would you have an electric car, and it does get better over time, whereas a petrol car does not. So that's my little discussion. Hopefully that's put a few questions to everybody, roughly about 30 minutes. So I will hand that back to, I think, is it Peter?